Hello, everyone, and welcome on behalf of the World Student Christian Federation. My name is Erin Hancock, and I am the conference organizer for the WSCF. This is part 2 of our virtual conversation series, A New Heaven and New Earth, Progressive Christian Students Imagine a New World. Our grounding scripture for this series comes from the book of Revelation, chapter 21, verse 1, which reads, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more." In the words of Arundhati Roy, in response to this moment in which we are currently living, this is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our databanks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us, or we can walk through lightly, with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. So, as the US and the world confront the interlocking pandemics of racism, white supremacy, and police brutality, extreme economic inequality, and ecological destruction, all within the context of the global pandemic, how do we respond from a Christian perspective to organize and build momentum toward a new world, rather than remaining within our current ways of operating? And that is the question we are seeking to address today, specifically as it relates to economic justice. And just as many people of faith who have come before us, our panelists for this conversation understand economic justice as a faith issue, as a moral issue. Their work for economic justice has been motivated by their belief in a God that stands with the oppressed, particularly those who have been systemically disempowered by racialized capitalism. Once again, I have the incredible privilege of introducing these amazing ministers, scholars, and activists to you all. The very Reverend Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas is the Dean of the Episcopal Divinity School at Union Theological Seminary, and the Bill and Judith Moyer's Chair in Theology at Union. She also serves as the Canon Theologian at the Washington National Cathedral and Theologian in Residence at Trinity Church, Wall Street. Dean Douglas is the author of 5 books, including Sexuality in the Black Church, A Womanist Perspective, and Stand Your Ground, Black Bodies and the Justice of God. Reverend Erica Williams, MDiv, is a national social justice organizer for Repairers of the Breach and the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. She is the founder of Set It Off Ministries, a movement that educates and empowers the poor and working class for liberation. Her life's mission is summed up in the gospel passage of Luke 4, 18 through 19. Ms. Athena Peralta is Program Executive of Economic and Ecological Justice for the World Council of Churches in Geneva, Switzerland. Her research and advocacy is focused on the intersections of economic, ecological, and gender justice. Nywel Cheaye is a junior at Vassar College, studying science and technology studies. She is passionate about engaging with the local community of Poughkeepsie, New York, by serving formerly incarcerated individuals, as well as working as a victim advocate for survivors of domestic violence. Nywel also leads as co-president of the Vassar Christian Fellowship. Our moderator for today is Stanley Washington. Stanley is a recent graduate of DePaul University College of Law in Chicago, Illinois. Stanley is a Christian and has found his purpose in helping his community in the areas of housing and community development. He is currently an eviction defense staff attorney for the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing in Chicago. Panelists, we are so thrilled to have each of you here with us today and acknowledge that much more could be said about each of you, but I don't want to take up more of our time. So with this, I will pass the mic off to our moderator, Stanley.
Thank you so much, Erin. I'm very excited to be here today. And what I want to start out with, because I felt like this scripture was so fitting. The book of Luke in the 4th chapter, the King James Version, and it talks about when Jesus was tempted and how he went to Jerusalem. And so I'll start. And so it says at verse 9, "And he brought him to Jerusalem and set him on a pinnacle of the temple and said unto him, If thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down from hence. For it is written, He shall give his angels charge over thee to keep thee. And in their hands I shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. And Jesus answering said unto him, It is said, Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. And when the devil had ended all the temptation, he departed from him for a season. And Jesus returned in the power of the Spirit into Galilee, and there went out a fame of him through all the region round about. And he taught in their synagogues, being glorified of all. And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, he went into synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up for the reading. And there was delivered upon him the book of the prophet Isaiah. And when he had opened the book, he found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He hath sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord." And he closed the book, and he gave it again to the minister and sat down. And the eyes of all them that were in the synagogue were fastened upon him. And he began to say unto them, "This day is the scripture fulfilled in your ears." Thought that was so talk about economic justice. This word of doing for the poor and making sure that people are made whole. And so that's where we'll go ahead and jump into the questions. And I'll start with Reverend Douglas. The term economic justice can feel very vague or abstract. So can you start us off? Can you break us down exactly how you define the term economic justice? What does it look like, and how do we measure it?
Thanks for such an easy question, Mr. Washington. I will just lay out, and I know that my other colleagues on this panel will fill it in even more. So I'll just sort of put some things to hang our hat on, and maybe can develop it as we go further. First of all, for me, and this discussion of economic justice and justice in general must always begin with the notion that every single human being who has breath is indeed a sacred creation, without exception, which means then that there is no one that is more worthy or less worthy than another of life, liberty, and happiness. There is no one who is less worthy or more worthy of another to be able to live fully into whatever it is God has created them to be, and whomever it is God has created them to be. So if we start with that foundation of understanding that everyone that has breath is worthy, then and sacred, then indeed we have to begin to develop and create the kind of world, the systems and structures, policies and laws that allow people, that give people the freedom to be whomever it is they are created to be. So when we talk about that in terms of economic justice, we are talking about creating systems and structures in which people can thrive, and that indeed respect people not as essential workers, but essential human beings. You were talking about systems and structures that indeed seek to that are based upon protecting not labor, but lives. Now, those things are different, to be an essential worker and an essential human being, because typically essential workers are not considered essential human beings in our society. We seem to invest more in labor than we do in lives. And so that, to me, I just want to put that there as the foundation for what economic justice is and looks like. And in as much as we are in a capitalistic system, which indeed values work and values labor and not human beings and lives, well, we are in a system that betrays the sacredness of every human being, and hence it is not a just system. Hence, it is not an economically just system. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Reverend Douglas. I love that concept of being an essential human being. That's so powerful. How about you, Nywel? How would you what would you say you define economic justice as?
I would define economic justice to kind of center in between wealth distribution and then also access to opportunity. And I see that the world that we have right now, there is this entire gap where majority of Americans are middle class, working class, or poor. And then we have the 1% that are the billionaires, the millionaires, the owner of these huge corporations that profit off of the labor of the working class and poor individuals in America. And in an economically just world, we wouldn't have billionaires when there are still people who are unhoused, people that are food insecure, people that are being displaced from their communities due to gentrification. People would make a living wage where they can go to work and still be able to feed their family, still be able to pay their bills, instead of having to, have to stack on jobs, 3, 4, and 5 jobs to make ends meet. And I think that economic justice also comes into play, who really has wealth and how that wealth was taken. Who took that wealth? And I think that, within the US, we see how the indigenous and native communities, their wealth was in their land and that was stolen away from them. For the way that wealth was built, we had to exploit and profit from the labor of enslaved people. And even after slavery, we see that Black people were unable to own property, were unable to get mortgages to own houses. And the financial equity that comes from owning a house that Black people were not able to obtain in the beginning set them back. And that wealth that their counterparts were able to get at the beginning is where they are receding in the back. So I think that economic justice really would eliminate the hierarchy, and place people at a level where they are able to survive, and they're able to have their basic needs met at all times.
Thank you, Nywel. I think that's a great point. And you talk about the intentionality of how the system got to where it is, and you don't have just a natural phenomenon creating the haves and the have-nots. You have, systems of oppression and inequality constantly working and facilitating this type of economic injustice. And so thank you for that. How about you, Erica?
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke in 1968 when he talked about there are 2 Americas. And it's so interesting because we see that to this very day. I was just in Washington, D.C. yesterday, and I was driving into the city, and I saw skyscrapers all over the city as they're building up new complexes every day in Washington, D.C. But as we got deeper into the city, I saw so many tents and sisters and brothers and kin who were outside, who didn't have a place to go, who were asking for food and asking for resources, as Dr. Douglas has already told us, that they deserve. And so America, what we have seen, and I want to be very clear, is, as my sister Nywel also mentioned, that this was started when this country was created on the genocide of the First Nation family. And then if we go and look 401 years later, when the enslavement of Africans was brought here, our ancestors were worked to death, and they were free labor. They didn't get any wages. They didn't get anything. And we look now, 401 years later, and the federal minimum wage is $7.25. And in this country right now, you have over 140 million poor and low-income folks, and that was before the pandemic. That was before COVID-19. So even before COVID, there was a pandemic of systemic racism and systemic poverty. And so here you have now a country that has so many people who are poor, and the national narrative that we have is this poor Black and brown folks. But in this country, we found that there are over 67 million poor white folks in this country. So it ain't just about race. Please get it clear. America has been about that mighty dollar. And as we say in the hood, cash rules everything around me, the dollar bill, y'all. It was started on the backs of genocide and to build a wealth in this nation that would keep some having and some not having. And so what King and others saw then, we're seeing it now. And that's America's MO. America is all about the money, and it is all about keeping some not having. And so my soul is full today. As I said, being in DC yesterday, and as we marched on the Senate with Reverend Leah Steele Harris and Reverend Dr. William Barber, as we called the sins of the Senate, and even about the injustice of Breonna Taylor murder, who was also a low-wage worker, even though she was an EMT. And also she lived in an ecological, devastated community. I've been to Louisville, Kentucky to see the area where she lived. This country continues over and over and over again to let us know very clear that there will be some that will have, and there will be some who don't. And that is the question today that we must address so clear in this nation. We cannot keep putting it off. We must answer, as Dr. King said, that question of why is there two Americas? Why are there some that have and some who don't?
Thank you so much, Erica. That's very powerful. Cash moved everything around me, right? So crazy that how, they have created this, just dichotomy of, one America versus the other America. And both of them are fighting each other, but not fighting the root cause of it. How about you, Athena? How would you define economic justice? What does it look like, and how do we measure it?
Thank you so much for that question. And I think one way to ground the concept of economic justice is to think of the economy as a dimension of life that, that ought to be concerned with the question of provisioning, as a realm of relationships. And it is perhaps more obscurely about our relationship with our ecological surroundings, but more obviously and more evidently about relationships between people, communities, and countries, and between producers and consumers, workers and employers, corporations and governments, and indeed in the current system where we live in, these are the only relationships apparently that matter, between producers and consumers and so on. But obviously, as Dean Douglas also has said, we are much more than that. People have inherent value. We are right holders. We are citizens. And so these relationships should not just be reduced to pure economic relationships or just one dimension of life. And in the current context that we live in, a context of globalization, these are relationships that transcend national borders. And here I'm trying to bring in, that perspective too. And we are here also as Christians, and I think from the Christian perspective, we have a very clear understanding of what economic justice is and how it is to be measured. And for us as Christians, economic justice is really measured by the quality of life of the least among us, those dwelling in the socioeconomic margins. That's how we measure economic justice. And so what would just economic relationships look like? And this would mean, for instance, that a farmer, say in the island of Negros in the Philippines, where I'm from, who's like producing sugar canes for sugar to export, say, to the United States, would not have to slave for and would actually get paid enough for his or her hard work so that they can feed their own families. In other words, it's about just wages, it's about decent livelihoods. This would also mean, for instance, that a multinational mining corporation, say in Zambia, would be paying fair taxes to the Zambian government instead of stashing profits in tax havens, etc. So that a country like Zambia would have enough resources to build hospitals and schools for their own, for their people. So it's also about, say, tax justice. And this could also mean that big banks and financial institutions don't get away with their irresponsible and destructive behavior, squeezing profit from less privileged, including African-American households, almost crashing the global economy back in 2008. And instead, strong regulations are put in place so that financial institutions can be made accountable. So these are some examples of what economic justice could look like.
Thank you, Athena, for touching on the accountability piece, because that's a huge, obviously a huge component of how we do this work. I want to talk about some accountability in the Christian faith and in the church. Moving on to our next question, and I'll start with you, Reverend Douglas. We know from history that Christians, have had a powerful voice in the movement for social change, but it seems often that there's a disconnect between what we hear in church on Sunday mornings, as opposed to how we engage with the poor in our own communities. Can you speak to why that is and what we need to do differently? And who should we hold accountable for our collective power as progressive Christians?
Again, thank you for that question. And I want to emphasize something that Athena said, and then if I can, and turn to this question, because I do think that it is very important to understand that we are talking about a global economy, and that we are talking about if the global pandemic didn't reveal to us more clearly that which we should have known of how interrelated and interconnected that we are, right? And so that when we're talking about economic injustice, say in the United States, we are talking about and even how the United States has built its wealth in other nations, that has been, just as it's been on the back of the least of these within our own context, it's been on the back of other countries, other developing countries that we don't let develop. And so that the problem with capitalism is that capital is the thing that is valued. Capital is valued more than life. Capital is valued more than compassion. And so when we're talking about a global economy that is based on a capitalistic structure, we are talking about an economy that requires that there be those who indeed that are labor and do not have enough, not simply to survive, but to thrive. And so we are talking about economic gap, wealth gap, as Nywel said, and an opportunity gap. And we're talking about a value system that indeed values capital, and therefore means that there will always have to be a wealth gap and an opportunity gap when capital is valued. And this is an anathema. This betrays all of our values, the values that we claim to hold as people of faith. And so to your question, so what does that mean? who holds us accountable? To whom shall we be accountable? We ought to be accountable. The very fact that we would claim to be people of faith means that we are not accountable to the way things are, to our present unjust realities. We are accountable to the way that we claim they are going to be. We are accountable to God's more just future. Now, this is a future. We talk about equity. Economic justice means equity. That therefore means a future, as we are told, where the last are first and the first are last, not because there is a reversal of fortune, but because the last are first, the first are last. You cannot tell the difference. They are treated equally, and so we have to create a world of equity, and so that where people have the opportunity to thrive. So what's it mean then? We talk about the church when there's this disconnect between what's preached and how the poor are treated by the faithful, by progressive religious leaders, as you've put it. Well, what that means is the church isn't being church. And if you want to close the gap, then you just got to start being church. And being church is not about what you preach, it's about what you do. And so that we have to replace preaching with proximity, right? Being proximate with those who are in fact on the underside, listening to, hearing, understanding. And because when they, just as Athena said, when they began to talk about justice, then we know that we're on our way to justice. So we have to create systems and structures that allow people to be no bottom, those people on the bottom to thrive. And so who are we accountable to? We're accountable to the claim that we call ourselves church. That's aspirational, it's not a fact. And so we need to go and act like we're church, get out of our buildings. And it's not that the preaching starts in the pulpit, the preaching starts where we are proximate, then we take that into the pulpit. We can lead people there if we're there in the first place.
That was just so powerful. We talked about replacing preaching with proximity, and I think that's so huge. Getting out of the church and actually doing the ministry work, spreading the gospel. And so I think that's huge. How about you, Nywel?
Yes, I definitely agree with everything that Dean Douglas said, that preaching starts with proximity. I think that a lot of times in church culture, our first instinct is to raise thousands of dollars to go on mission trips to underdeveloped countries to go and try to save them. But we ignore the things that are happening locally. We ignore the problems that are literally right in our backyards. And I think that when the church starts to realize that, it's not always about, this one-time thing that we do once a year, this trip that we take that's like kind of like a vacation, kind of like a charity mission that we do, and then the rest of the year we do nothing. I think that it's about, being accountable, saying that we're going to invest in a community long term, the community that is ours, and so that we can always see changes and always check up on that community. And I think that that's important rather than this far off place where we can just pop in, we want to save someone, and then leave when we're done.
Definitely. We have to do the work in our own backyards before we can try to worry about what someone else has going on, right? How about you, Athena?
Yes, again, not so easy question, and I thank you thank the previous panelists. But I would also like to maybe reflect a bit more on why churches are finding it so difficult, and I think part of it has to do with already what Erica mentioned before about the almighty dollar, and it is this idolatry of money, so to speak, which I think has never been more legitimized. I mean, now in the current context of financialized hyper-capitalism. And so I think I said in the beginning that yes, this is definitely a structural problem. We have financial and economic policies, international trade and finance rules, for instance, that are geared towards the relentless accumulation of wealth and the transfer of such wealth from those who have less to those who have more. But it is at core a deeply cultural, deeply spiritual problem, and which Erica also referred to. We live in a time when financial metrics are kind of like changing social relations and people's lives on a daily basis, where financial values are basically transforming human behavior, cultivating attitudes of calculation, maximization, promoting the belief that happiness comes from the accumulation of money, property, and so on. And our churches too are part of this, embedded in this social fabric and in this milieu, and are also complicit in these processes. And as Dean Douglas said, it's really about going back to the basics, being church, practicing what we preach, meaning what we say in the pulpit, and living this out in our daily lives and in our daily workings. But it is difficult because it is a spiritual, cultural problem, and so it is difficult. But our scriptures and our resources point to the way forward. So we struggle.
Thank you so much, Athena. I'll go to you, Erica. What is the disconnect between the church and this work? What do we do differently, and who should we hold accountable for this disconnect that we're experiencing?
Well, Stanley, you read the scripture earlier when you talked about Jesus, that brown-skinned Palestinian Jew, when he stepped on the scene, when he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor," which meant the house of Bethany, to the protocos, to those who have been made poor by the system, to heal the brokenhearted, to set the captive free, and to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord now, which meant the Jubilee, which meant the canceling of all debts. And so then Jesus closed that book, and he basically told them, like we would tell you, I'm from Saginaw, Michigan, right next door to Flint, Michigan. We'd just basically tell you it's on. And Jesus said, this is what I'm here to do. I'm the originator of the Poor People's Campaign, and I'm about to get me some disciples to go along with me so we can set this world on fire to change this economic plight of all people. As Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas said, not just the Jews, but for all people. So this fight is global. It's not just for certain folks, it's for all of us. And the thing is, people have forgotten that message, that Christ, his inaugural message, because a lot of us, especially the church, we are just chapters of capitalism. A lot of our churches are right a part of that superstructure that continues to perpetuate the oppression of people. And so what we got to start doing, and Dr. Douglas talked about that too, is challenging these faith leaders, because a lot of them, and I said this to our group a couple of days ago, I said a lot of them are chaplains of the empire, but God is calling for prophets right now. And so a lot of them are not wanting to step out of their status quo to challenge the systems because they are too comfortable. And so that is the revolutionary thing we have to do, is go back to the original message of Christ and to do what he called us was to do, which was to take care of the poor, the orphan, the widow, the immigrant, the stranger, and stop being about this bull crap of the capitalist society, of not standing up against the powers and saying to them, you better do what God said do, or else the judgment will come upon you. And so the church has got to get back into its rightful place. And I know I'm probably coming off real passionate about it. But whenever you read the scriptures, it was always the prophets of God that challenged the system. And right now we have too many pimps in the pulpit. That's what my grandma used to always say. We got too many folks in the pulpit who are pimping the people. And I know firsthand, because I was in a church for many years, that they would ask for you to build a new church, but wouldn't even help people to get food every day. I had a grandmother who died who couldn't pay for her medication because she was on a fixed income, but the pastor was asking her every Sunday to give money for a new church. And so churches have got to understand it's not about the building. It's not about putting more new things in a building to edify the building, but it is taking care of the needs of people and doing as Christ did, not just doing charity, but also seeking justice, also going to the heart of power and saying, you better do right by the people of God, because we, the people of God, have the moral authority to challenge this very system and to take it down.
Thank you, Erica. You talked about, what the church needs to do, and I was just wondering, are there any particular theological resources that keep you grounded in this work for economic justice, and then are there any particular Bible stories that motivate your work?
Who was the question for?
I'll start with you, Erica.
Oh, all right. Well, you done got me stirred. I'm over here and I'm feeling my grandmother's spirit as I'm speaking. So I must say her name in this space, Miss Willie G. Morris, who was a low-wage worker. She was the one who cleaned toilets for many years. And so I often tell people I cannot say anything about this work of justice without honoring my grandmother, who was my first theologian. She was the one who taught me about being in community and loving people and making sure everybody had something, regardless of what race, what creed, sexuality, nationality. My grandma said, if we got it, everybody got it. And so I want to honor her in this space on this morning. And for me, I live at the helm of Fannie Lou Hamer. She was a PO, as they would say. She couldn't afford even the O and the R. Black woman, sharecropper from Ruleville, Mississippi. And so I honor Fannie Lou Hamer even in this conversation, because I know that she and others did so much work in terms of economic justice. And that is who I look to for a lot of my work. She grounds me. And she helps me to stay committed to this fight, because she was 44 years old when she got into this fight. And her favorite scripture was also, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, Luke 4:18. And she used that to propel her in this fight against economic justice. And I often tell people, when Fannie Lou Hamer spoke at the Democratic National Convention in 1968, Lyndon Baines Johnson cut her off because he didn't want America to see this Black woman to share about her plight and the plight of others in Mississippi. And she spoke truth to power right there. They didn't cut off Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but it was Fannie Lou Hamer that they cut off. And so I always like to honor her and to read her works. That's what keeps me grounded. And it keeps me, as y'all young folks would say, it keeps me not scared. It gives me that momentum and that drive to not back up, because Fannie Lou Hamer was almost killed down in Indianola for trying to go and register folks to vote. And Fannie Lou Hamer said, to tell the truth today is the risk of almost being killed. She said, but I'm not backing up. She said, I will fall 5 feet 4 inches forward. I'm not backing up. And so that is the same mentality that I try to ground myself in, recognizing this fight that we're in. It didn't start with us. As I told you, Jesus Christ was in it. Martin Luther King was in it. Fannie Lou was in it. Ella Josephine Baker was in it. Sojourner Truth was in it. Harriet Tubman was in it. A lot of our foremothers and forefathers were in this fight. And I use their energy and their strength to continue to go forward in this fight, because I know within my heart, we have a cloud of witnesses watching us. They are propelling us on. And even more right now, I feel their spirit so much, y'all, in my life, because I know they're calling us to stand up to this empire. I know y'all watched the debate last night between the two presidential candidates, the president and the presidential candidate. And I just sat there and I wept, because I said, our people are in need of real revolutionary change. We're tired of reforms. We're tired of people just getting scraps. We need to have the justice that people so rightfully deserve. And so I'm honoring Fannie Lou and all those ancestors before me, and Jesus Christ is in that, to use their work to propel us to fight like hell, as Mother Jones said, pray for the dead, but fight like hell for the living.
Absolutely. I can feel that fight coming from you, Erica, definitely. How about you, Athena? Are there any resources that keep you grounded in this work for economic justice, and are there particular Bible stories that motivate your work?
Yeah, I hope it doesn't sound too cliche-ish, but yeah, probably the favorite line in the Bible for me would be John 10:10. You know, I come so that all may have life in fullness, and it's so heavy with the promise of a new and different and wonderful and joyful world. It's such a you know, an inclusive and embracing vision. And yeah, that would be my favorite verse. But Jesus told a lot of parables, and these two are like a you know, a huge treasure trove. And it's not, you know, these parables are not so like straightforward. You know, they make you think, and oftentimes they, you know, they make you debunk the old assumptions. And I mean, I won't go into detail, but I would perhaps mention the parable of the talents, and you know, how many of us automatically assume that the master there is, you know, is God, but is it really, you know, God? So these are some of the resources. The Jubilee concept is also really powerful, and speaks to me and to my communities, to my community as well. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Athena, for that. How about you, Reverend Douglas? You know, where are there particular theological resources that keep you grounded in this work for economic justice, and are there particular Bible stories that you look to?
Yeah, I can be brief here. First of all, thank everyone for their responses. And Erica, you make me remember, and as I do all the time, because I wouldn't be here without her dream. My own grandmother, who migrated during the time of the Great Migrations up from the South, from Georgia, eventually ending up in Ohio, having less than a 6th grade education. And when I knew her, all the time that I knew her, she ran an elevator. And those were the elevators, the pulley elevators, right? Where you really pushed a bell and it rang, and it was, you'd open the elevator operator sitting in the side door and opening up 2 gates. That was my grandmother. She would put money aside from a very meager paycheck because she had a dream. And her dream was that one day her 4 grandchildren, which would be me and my 3 siblings, that her 4 grandchildren would one day simply finish high school. And each of her 4 grandchildren obviously were able to go on and have terminal degrees. And she couldn't even dream that dream. She could only dream that her 4 grandchildren would be able to get a high school diploma. And so, you know, and put pennies aside every week to do that. She didn't live long enough to see any of us finish high school. So it seems to me that, first of all, economic justice begins with a system, a country, a culture, which allow people to dream the dream. What is the scripture for me that keeps me, if you might say, in this work? It is the quote unquote golden rule, which every major religion has some form of the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But I like to take that golden rule in the reverse and try to live by it. And that is to withhold from another nothing that you would not want withheld from yourself. If you want a decent place to live, don't withhold it from another. If you want enough food to eat, don't withhold it from another. If you want health care, don't withhold it from another. If you want the opportunity to live into the fullness of whoever it is you were created to be, don't withhold that opportunity from another. If you want the opportunity to dream the dream, then don't withhold that from another. And so that's what grounds me, and that's what I live by.
Thank you so much, Reverend Douglas. I'll go to you, Nywel. Are there any theological resources that keep you grounded in this work? And, are there particular Bible stories that you look to?
I'll start by saying that all the past responses have been incredibly powerful. So thank you all for that. One text that I really love is 50 Reasons Jesus Came to Die by John Piper. And he really talks about salvation and the ways in which the reasons for Jesus' death and the reasons for his obedience. And one of the reasons is our justification, because he justifies the ungodly who trust in his grace. And through Jesus' justification of us, he declares us righteous and he cancels the guilt of all of our crimes. And Romans 5:19 says that by the one man's obedience, the many will be made righteous. And so reading that verse, I feel like very, very much grounds me in this work, because it allows us to see each other in a way that is very humbling, see each other with this slate that is clean, because Jesus declared all of us righteous, canceled all of our guilt, of all of our crimes. And specifically within economic justice and working with people who have been formerly incarcerated, these people have committed real crimes, aggravated assault, second-degree murder. Some of them are sex offenders. And I think that when we're doing this work, we have this idea or this perception of who deserves to be helped, and that only people that are like innocent and helpless can deserve help. But I think that also we should realize that if God is able to look at us and declare all of us righteous and cancel all of the things that we've done in our past, that we can look at other people with that same lens and say that even though you have done these things in your past, you have caused harm to other people, that does not mean that you don't deserve to have somewhere to live, that you have to sleep in laundromats and in fast food restaurants, that you don't deserve to have clothes, that you deserve to be discriminated by every single employer that you go to because of this record that you've had from 20 years ago. And I think that we should remember that everyone deserves to have a good quality of life, a quality of life where they're thriving. And if Jesus can look at us in that light and with that lens, then we should also be able to do that for others.
Thank you so much, Nywel. Yeah, I want to stay with you. This panel is intended for progressive Christian students, and it can be hard to find time to plug in or even know where to start. So what advice do you have for students who want to be more involved in this work for economic justice, and what are the first steps that you would take?
Well, as a student at Vassar, our college is very uniquely placed because we are at this very elite institution that is placed in a working class community with majority Black and brown folks. And I think a lot of times being in college, always our goal is like, to further our career and to build our resumes and stack up these lists of internships that we're doing. But I think that it's important to know that if you're someone that's truly dedicated to the work of social justice and economic justice, that you make long-term commitments to organizations, that you provide long-term support, that you're not someone who's just popcorning in and out of places when you see fit to build this resume or to get these recommendations, but that people constantly see your face, that people know that you're here for the long term, and those are the things that make people begin to trust you, that make you connected to people in a powerful and meaningful way, if they continuously see you committed to the work that you're doing. I think also to add on to that, within academia, because we're always, reading and analyzing and critiquing all of these texts, that we think ourselves to hold this certain standard of knowledge, and then that we're supposed to like go out into the world and like teach other people that knowledge. But I think that it's important to look at communities and declare locals as also people that hold knowledge. You know, people that are impoverished, people that are in poverty, they are experts on their lived experience. No matter what I read or analyze in the classroom, no matter how many degrees I have, whether I have a master's, PhD, it does not matter. I am not a scholar on the experience of living in poverty. And so I think that it's important to look at those people and look at locals and say, what direction do you want me to take? What do you need in your community? Not for me to come and tell you what I can do for you, or you know, kind of like try to analyze you in this way, but really looking at people and saying, I trust you as an expert of your experience, and I want you to lead me in the direction that you think I should go to help serve your community.
Awesome. How about you, Reverend Douglas? What would you say to students who want to figure out how to do this work?
Yes, you know what? I would say that everyone has a role to play, and one just needs to find their voice, you know, and that I like to say, just get on the arc that bends toward justice. Figure out your way onto it, and that as long as you're out there, none of us have all the right answers. None of us can do it all. We can only do our part. And so I'd say the first step is just when you ask the question, what can I do? You're on the arc, and just go do something. And then from there, it grows.
Thank you so much. I'll ask you the same question, Athena. How does a student get involved in this work? What would you say their first steps need?
Yeah, I think I'll first make a plea here that just to say that there are many burning issues in our local communities that we definitely have to be engaged in, and I think that is a first step. But I would also make a plea that, you know, we need to also look beyond to kind of like expand you know, the boundaries of our empathy, and be able to also express some solidarity with our sisters and brothers in other parts of the world who are, for instance, profoundly affected by say the policies of the U.S. government, you know, by consumption patterns, and I think a starting point is also, you know, also about acknowledging you know, one's privilege. I think that's always a you know, a good starting point, and in this case, one's economic privilege, but then also to go beyond that and try to express solidarity with communities in perhaps faraway places, but who are deeply affected by simple things like you know, what you buy, what you eat, and so forth. And I will also make a plea here to not be afraid about talking about transformation of global financial and economic structures, because sometimes you know, when we think about, we find it like, you know, frustrating, disempowering. It's too complex, too technical. You know, it's kind of maybe a bit out there, but again, it's affecting the lives of hundreds of millions of people, and there is no need to reinvent the wheel here. There are existing initiatives, existing campaigns, including global ecumenical campaigns, for instance, for you know, for building a new international financial and economic architecture. It's a mouthful, but it is an ecumenical campaign, and part of it is what we call the Zacchaeus tax campaign, for instance, which is, of course, building on the Zacchaeus story. And the Zacchaeus tax campaign calls for progressive wealth taxes at different levels. It calls for an end to tax evasion, tax havens. It calls for carbon and pollution taxes, and so on and so forth. There is an old but still extremely relevant and really important Jubilee campaign for the cancellation of debts of low income and middle income countries. And now this call is made even more urgent by COVID-19 and climate change. And so these are concrete initiatives and campaigns that Christian students can be part of.
Thank you so much, Athena. And last but not least, I'll have you let us know what students can do to get started, Erica.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. And I sing that because that is a passage of scripture that I love, and also my shero, as I mentioned earlier, Fannie Lou Hamer, she often sung this song whenever they would have movement events. And I say that to you young people, and I say that to all of us. As Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas said to us, get on the ark of justice. But all I ask you is to let that light that you have in you, let it shine. Find out whatever it is that, as we said, all of us, the panelists have said, that you are passionate about, and you go for it. Don't let nobody tell you because you're young or you're a student or whatever the isms is that people will try to push you back with. Go forward with your light and be bright. The scripture talks about, do not be a light, a bushel that goes and be hidden. I said that wrong, but y'all can get it. Go find it in the scripture. Don't let your light be put out because of what people tell you can and cannot do. Find your voice, find your light, and let it shine wherever you go, in the streets, in the church, in your school. Let it shine, because what the world needs more of is, as Dr. Howard Thurman says, of more people who have come alive. And we need the world alive. We need you young people alive. You have intellect, you have brilliance, you have knowledge, you have so much, and we need you to spark this world with your light and take it over, because I know that God has called you for a special purpose. So let your light shine before all humankind so that we can change this nation, so we can rock it. So shine, shine, shine everywhere you go and turn this world upside right.
Thank you so much, Erica. Like you said, let your light shine, students. And as Reverend Douglas said, just make sure you get on that ark and start doing this work. With that, I'll pass it off to you, Erin.
Yes, thank you all so much for sharing your time and wisdom with us today. It's been such a privilege to share this space with you all. For those of you who are watching, we hope this discussion inspires conversation and action, and we look forward to you all joining us for part 3 of this series on faith and ecological justice. And with that, I would like to pass it off to Reverend Erica Williams to offer a closing blessing for us.
So Spirit and Creator, we thank you for this opportunity to come to discuss the matters that concern your heart. Guide us as we go on this journey to bring liberation and justice to your people, God, all those across the globe who are in need of this light in which you have called for us to bring. Now I command the blessing upon every person that is listening to this very call. I pray that you would spark in them a light that cannot be hidden, and stir up the gifts in them so that they can go out and be the hands and feet that you've called them to be in the earth. Revive us, restore us, and recalibrate us so that we can go forward with your power and your strength to change this world and make it the world that you would have it to be. It's in all names that are holy, I call this blessing and command this prayer. Ashe and amen.